All right, we'll get started. Thank you for joining at 8 o'clock. We are into code generation, and by and large, whatever three important aspects of code generation that we required that we have discussed. One aspect which becomes rather important from the perspective of more on the analysis and optimization, uh, but it's definitely something which is useful in the context of code generation is how to divide the program into different parts, and then how do you represent those different parts together so that it becomes easier for you to analyze the program. Why do you want to analyze the program is because you want to extract some information about the program. Let's say you want to find out dependencies across different statements, or maybe you want to perform certain optimizations. So that pictorial representation of the program is called control flow graph, or CFG, and that's what we are going to look at. The building block of a the control flow graph is called as a basic block, and basic block is a maximal sequence of consecutive, let's say IR instructions, with some properties satisfied by those sequence of instructions. Right. So what are those properties? There are two main properties. One is single exit, another is single entry. What does single entry mean? That means that the control flow enters the basic block through only the first instruction in the block. That means that you cannot have, let's say there is a bunch of instructions I1, I2, I3, I4, and then I2 also has a jump to it, right? So some other instruction anywhere in the program, if it has jumped to I2, then I1 and I2 cannot be part of the same control, same basic block. I1 definitely is the first instruction in the basic block, and therefore I1 is one possible entry. I2, I3, I4 cannot be any of the entries for the basic block. Right? If I2 also happens to be another entry, if there is jump to I2, then I1 and I2 need to be in separate basic blocks. The second property that must be satisfied is the single exit. That is, the control leaves the block only after the last instruction, which means that if I1, I2, I3, I4 are 4 instructions, I2 cannot be jumped to some other instruction, or I3 cannot be jumped to some other instruction, or even I1. As soon as some instruction has a jump, that marks the end of that basic block. Right. So with these two properties, with these two properties, it becomes evident that if the control reaches I1, right, if the control flow in the program reaches I1, then all the instructions in it are going to get executed in that particular sequence, I1, I2, I3, I4, with the assumption that none of these are exit instructions, or not exit, but none of these cause an exception. So assuming that that happens, it is guaranteed that if you enter the basic block at I1, you will always exit it at I4. Right? So why is this useful? Is because then the control flow is guaranteed between this particular basic block, and you can argue about some effects of these statements at the basic block level rather than at individual statement level. Whatever you can do at the basic block, that you can as well do, right? Whatever you can do at the basic block, that you can as well do by considering individual statements as different basic blocks. That is okay. It's just that it becomes easier to do it using this maximal sequence of instructions. So in the degenerate case, when every instruction is considered separately, every 3 address code or IR instruction is considered separately, it is still all right. It's just that you can compute exactly the same information as bunching these together, but it becomes rather convenient to consider it as using basic blocks. So that you should always think about it in the degenerate case, that you consider every instruction separately, and uh, that is still a valid control flow graph. And the flow across these basic blocks. So whenever you have from the last instruction in a basic block, you have a jump to another basic block, that to another basic block's first instruction, then that forms an edge across basic blocks. So basic blocks form the nodes, and the edges, the jump instructions, form the uh, edges across these nodes, and these nodes and edges together form a graph, a directed graph, unweighted graph, and that is called as a control flow graph. So let's build that control flow graph for a specific example. So let's say that I am given this source code, right? I would like all of you to write down, or at least draw, the three address code IR corresponding to this nested for loop followed by a single for. So first we have to write the IR corresponding to the source, right, which should start with, you can assume some sort of pseudo IR available with you. For example, II equal to 0 can itself be represented as II equal to 0. So that is not a problem. Then II less than 10 is going to be some condition evaluation, so that you can have either if true, if false, or you can just have that if II less than 10, then jump or something like that. So please try that. If you have any difficulty in constructing the flow graph, in constructing the IR, please let me know. So depending upon how you write the condition, there should be a conditional jump because of II less than 10 to JJ equal to 0, or it should come out of this loop, which means that it should come to the second II equal to 0. And then again from JJ equal to 0, it should go to JJ less than 10, and then again there will be a conditional jump to AA, to assignment to AIJ, or it should come out of this inner loop. So from the inner loop, when it comes out, the end of the inner loop is actually plus plus I, right? So that should get executed. And from plus plus I, it should go to II less than 10. From plus plus J, it should go to JJ less than 10. Plus plus, sorry. plus plus j should be followed by aij equal to 0. So the IR should look something like this, depending upon how you write. Um, so I have represented using different statements which are associated with different labels. So for example, sorry about that, this should be II equal to 0. This JJ equal to 0, and then I'm going to evaluate the condition. Incidentally, in many cases, you might have some sort of do while loop instead of the for loop. If the compiler is able to figure out that it is at least one iteration is going to happen, right? So it becomes easier for the compiler to generate this code. So you will see that directly you will have the instructions from the uh, uh, loop being generated without the conditional evaluation. So although we know that IR less than 10 must be executed before uh, uh, it enters the inner for loop, but that might not happen if the compiler is able to figure that out. So this part is essentially equivalent to evaluation of Aij equal to 0. At Aij equal to 0, I am going to assume that it is going to be an integer, and therefore there is going to be some sort of multiplication by 4, etc. is going to happen, and so on. Plus there is some assumption with respect to the dimensions of the array, right? Because Aij is going to require me to know the number of columns in the array, which I'm going to assume is to be 10 and so on. So ignore that part, but by and large you should be able to write such a code. And then finally there is assignment to Aij. At the IR level, I'm going to assume that it's a single dimensional array and so on. It again depends upon my IR. I might consider it to be single dimensional or multidimensional. It's totally up to me. But as a lower level IR, I'll consider it to be single dimensional, because the assembly code is going to be using single dimensional array. Sorry about this. Followed by JJ equal to JJ plus 1. Then the conditional check. The conditional check is going to either go to L1 or it is going to go back to the outer loop. Right? So L1 is going to keep evaluating the inner loop, and then the outer loop increments I, and it goes back to next iteration of I. Otherwise, it goes to the second loop in the second outermost loop. It is the AII equal to 1, that loop. So that also is similar, where the compiler is able to figure out that there is at least one iteration of this. Any questions on this IR? So you might have written it in a slightly different way, which is okay. I mean, you might not have taken the do while part. You could have written the while loop. That is perfect. Optimization regarding the do while point we have discussed, it is done by optimization on IR level. Yes, that gets done at the optimization at the IR level. That also we have not yet covered, but it can happen only with the optimization. Typically, the IR generator will not worry about these limits and so on. It will just go on generating the code. Right? Only the optimization pass will do it. There are typically very few optimizations which get done along with the IR generation or along with the code generation. Mostly it gets pushed to the later part. The reason being that you want all of those to be made optional, or most of them to be made optional, because the user needs to have the control of whether to enable certain optimizations or not. Right? So by default, we don't perform most of the optimizations. There are some which get performed, and then depending upon O1, O2, O3, we want to go to different optimization levels. So therefore, typically it gets pushed as a separate phase. Any other concerns? All right, so let's build the control flow graph corresponding to this IR. So it's the labels in this are kind of going to tell you some sort of boundaries of these basic blocks. Similarly, as soon as there are go tools or jumps, those are going to tell you other set of boundaries. What this means is that I equal to 0 and j equal to 0 should be in separate blocks. Right? Although there doesn't seem to be any control flow in between I equal to 0 and j equal to 0 seem to be, well, uh, a sequence of instructions which get executed. But why should j equal to 0 not be part of the same block as I equal to 0? It can get executed first. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, no, it's not that it can get executed first. What can happen is that there is a jump to j equal to 0. And therefore, I equal to 0 and j equal to 0, as Sarthak is suggesting and Pragyan is suggesting, it's not always the case that these two are executed together. I equal to 0 can happen, and then jj equal to 0 might happen later or might not happen because of ii less than 10 instruction. Uh, in fact, we will have, as we build the rest of the basic blocks, you will have jump to this B2, and therefore ii equal to 0 might not get executed when jj equal to 0 gets executed, or vice versa. And therefore, we need to be, why are we doing T4 equal to T3 minus 44? Again, this is something which happens on the stack. T3 minus 44 is coming out because of, again, the instructions with respect to the dimensions of the array. And I'm assuming that the array is growing on the stack in the reverse direction. Right? So we typically say that it goes upwards, but on the Intel architectures, it actually reduces in the memory addresses. So that's why it is turning out to be that. So 10 into 4, assuming that there are 10 elements, 10 into 4 is going to be T3 minus 40. Okay, let me just quickly check that. T1 equal to 10 into I. That is okay. That is going to a particular row. Then j is going to a particular column. Then T3 equal to 4 into T2, that is size of the int. And then that address minus 44 is going to be A of T4. Okay. Where is that coming from? Yeah, this 44 doesn't seem to be really relevant, but I guess if I recall correctly, I have added it looking at the actual code that got generated. My feeling is that it must be coming because of 44 being the can it be the offset, but then we are using A of, why are we not using A of T3 directly, where we extracting 44 out of it. Okay, so I am not able to recall why I had added this minus 44. The only thing I recall is that I looked at the assembly code that got generated, and accordingly I had written this. But let me see. So this part is going to use, this is I minus 1, that is okay. I minus 1 into 44, that is 4 into 10 minus 44. So here also there is minus 44 happening for A of I. Yeah, the only, no, that doesn't make sense. Does anybody see why that could be? Uh, I think it's because it is one indexed. Is it? Mm, one indexed, is it? That doesn't seem. I see. So let's see. So this would have been then I minus 1. This would have been j minus 1 if it would have been one indexed. That minus 1 multiplied by, I mean 1 multiplied by 10 into 4 would have happened for I, and that minus j, I mean j is minus 1 would have probably, yeah, that makes sense. All right, so I think you guys seem to be right. So what Arnav and Nishchit are saying, that minus 44, okay. So that means that I didn't see it in the assembly code generated. I must have seen it in the book, and the book might have had one based indexing, or I don't know. But yeah, so that makes sense because the calculations, yeah, thanks for that. So if this would have been one based indexing where this I equal to 1 and jj equal to 1, in that case we would require sorry, we would have required I minus 1 and j minus 1 to get the correct offset, because at the uh, I mean, as far as the actual array is concerned, you will still require zero based indexing, considering that A is going to be the base address. Not specifically for C, but maybe in some other language if it is one based indexing. Yeah, and that would have required I minus 1 into 10 into 4, and then j minus 1. So that would have made 40 minus 4, and that would have added minus 44. That makes sense. Good. Does that seem reasonable, Anishwar? Oh, good. All right. So, yeah, and that also explains this 44 into T5, which is again going to be this I minus 1. And that minus 1 is going to get multiplied by this 44 to have that minus 44 coming into picture there also. Okay, so we were talking about this control flow graph, and jj equal to 0 happens. After that, there is next label, and just having a label there doesn't mean anything, because you can have arbitrary set of labels anywhere in the program. But if there is a jump to that label, then you have to split j equal to 0 now. I mean, the basic block B2 into, I mean, we have to end the basic block B2. We cannot have assignment to T1 along with j equal to 0, because there might be a jump to L1. However, assignment to T1, after that there is no label, and there is a guarantee that after T1, T2 is always going to happen, and similarly T3, T4, etc. until we have this j less than 10 go to L1 kind of statement. Right? So all of these instructions are going to get executed um, together, in the sense that if you execute assignment to T1, then evaluation of j less than 10 is guaranteed to happen, assuming that all the instructions execute without any exceptions. The go to L1 gives us the control flow edge, which means that from this basic block, let's call it B3, I am going to go to B2 backwards, right? At the same time, since this is conditional jump, from the if condition jj less than 10, I might as well go to the next basic block, which is I equal to I plus 1. I equal to I plus 1 is not part of B3 that we are going to show here. Did I say? Oh, L1 is go to L1, so it's the same basic block. Okay, so there is a self loop for B3, and that's an indication that it is going to be a loop. Right? I mean, a loop in the source code. And that is going to form the next boundary of the basic block, and so on. Can you finish the rest of the control flow graph? So I have not shown the edges, but the edges are going to be like this here, then here, of course, the directed edges here. And then there will be an edge like this. Sorry, you hope you understand that. Okay, Venkat's question, if it is one based index, then isn't I equal to 0 out of bounds? Yes. I think what must have happened, and it must be my mistake, that initially it must have been, the book must have mentioned it using one based indexing, and I must have converted it into 0 based indexing. And that must have caused this trouble, that I have kept the instructions the same, just changed the indices I equal to 0, jj equal to 0. I think that's my mistake, but I'll check if that is the case. But it looks correct that I think we should just change it to I equal to 1, jj equal to 1, and that should take care of.
Sir?
Venkat is saying something.
Sir, am I audible?
Yeah, you're right.
Sir, then in such a case, if it was out of bounds, then we wouldn't have been able to do this optimization over here, right?
In this case, it is likely that the compiler will be able to figure out that there is some issue. Most probably, it will give an error or at least a warning that this is out of bounds. However, not always we will be able to do this, because, for example, I could be some variable, and that variable might be 0. And unless the compiler performs the optimization, it won't be able to figure out that it is actually assigning the value 0. In many cases, for example, in C, for example, we might say that I equal to -1 is a wrong thing, but that may not happen, right? Because I might just pass, let's say, ampersand of a of 5 to a function, and then within that function I'm using I equal to -1, I less than whatever 4, and plus plus I. So that is still valid. So C compiler will not even give an error there, and it's not an error as such, right? So in such cases, it might just be allowed. That's what I'm saying. Only in cases where the negative indices are strictly disallowed, etc. In that case, you will get an error. Yeah, go ahead.
So, what I meant was, we had this optimization over here when we knew that I equal to 0 and j equal to 0, we'll at least go into the loop once. So that's why we did this optimization over here. I meant that, if it was out of bounds, this optimization wouldn't have been done by the compiler because it's conservative, right?
Why do you say that it is conservative?
The conservative thing we discussed in last class, that it will make the worst possible case assumption, and it won't do this optimization unless it's sure that we'll go into the loop at least once.
No. So when it assumes that, the exceptions are not going to happen. So by default, we don't assume that the exceptions will happen. In fact, we assume that the exceptions will not happen. So if I equal to 0 results in an exception, anyway the rest of the code is not going to get executed. So even if you optimize the rest of the code, it is still not going to hurt,
Okay, sir.
right? So the optimizations are going to come into picture when uh, uh, I mean, we assume that the code is going to get executed. So conservative thing is going to come into picture when we enable certain optimizations. When we can enable certain optimizations, which means that the code is going to get executed, but we decide not to because of various reasons that we don't have enough info.
Sir, so like exceptions and out of bound things that we have over here, they don't actually matter to the optimizer much. Like they are just assumed that it'll cause it'll cause exception in the original runtime, so we don't have to bother about it.
I would say yes and no. The reason being that as far as languages like C are concerned, it will still perform these optimizations. However, in some other languages such as Java or even in C++ when you are using a try catch block, you might be able to catch such an exception. And so in case of C, for example, if this exception happens, you are not going to execute the rest of the code, whether optimized or unoptimized. So you are done and you are safe with respect to the rest of the code, whether you use optimize it or not. But in case of C++ Java, you have the option of catching that exception and continuing with the rest of the code. That can cause a trouble because if that exception has happened and something that you assumed would have executed has not been executed, then the optimization effect is going to be wrong. And that's one of the reasons why exceptions or arbitrary control flow becomes a problem for the optimizations in the compiler. Many times whenever there is try catch block, certain control flow optimizations are disabled for that particular try block. Because try as well as catch block, because it is not guaranteed that all the statements are going to get executed, but the rest of the program is likely to get executed. So this is kind of language semantics dependent. But yes, so in general, when we are talking about an C-like program, you will be able to perform optimizations. You don't have to be conservative here. But in some other languages, you will have to be conservative. Does that seem reasonable?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Any other concerns anybody has? That was a good question. All right. So yeah, the basic block 4 is also shown here.
Which again is the boundary for go to L2, and that L2 is essentially decided by B2, right? So that is shown here. And then similarly, there are other statements. For example, you can have j equal to 1, and then L3 has a jump, and therefore j equal to 1, sorry, not j equal to, I equal to 1 will happen in as a singleton in basic block 5, and then the rest of the code in another basic block. Right. So, and the edges I'm going to show now. Let me just remove. Yes, and that is going to be like this. So B6 is going back to itself, then B2. So I have replaced those L1, L2, L3 by B2 just for our exposition purpose. It's not that it actually replaces it. It remains it as labels, and the labels are part of the basic block. It's just that for our understanding purpose, I have replaced those instructions, but the instructions don't change. Right? This is just a representation. Right? And then there is one more, go to B3, and that is your basic control flow graph with respect to these basic blocks. There will be some entry and there will be some exit. So this basic block, although we have shown it for part of the code, typically it gets done for a function, right? And that function will have some sort of an entry, and it will also have some sort of an exit, and those entry exit could themselves be considered as the entry block and the exit block, which could be separate blocks altogether or some other mnemonic. It's just a representation. But these entry exit blocks are going to get used to tie up the control flow graphs of two functions. So one is a caller, another is a callee. Then from the call function, that is the function call statement, there is a jump to this entry block of that function of the callee, and from the exit of the callee there is a connection back to the same instruction in the caller, right? Sometimes uh, the function call gets split into two basic blocks, right? So one is the call, another is the return. The call to entry edge exists, and from exit to the return block of the caller, that edge exists. So that forms a connection across these different control flow graphs of different functions. That together is called as program. Yeah, I forget the name. I think it is PDG or SDG, program dependence graph, or system dependence graph, one of them. But anyway, so you can build typically control flow graphs get built for a single function, and then across functions those get linked using these function calls. All right, so if there are any questions, we can take those up now. Otherwise, I'll ask you to do some classwork with another example. All right, so let's do that. So ideally, we should convert this into an IR and then build it. But it suffices for us to use directly these statements at the source code level itself. So you won't have for loop, etc. But you can have I equal to 1 and prod star equal to II, etc. So you can use these to convert it into the directly the control flow graph. So we'll not get into IR for now. So once done, please tell me how many basic blocks are there in your control flow graph, excluding the entry and exit. The question from Venkat is, isn't the number of blocks dependent on how we have used labels for our control flow statements? That is correct. So your number of basic blocks might differ, but if you follow the usual procedure of maximal blocks and reasonable 3-address code form, or in this case just the I mean, kind of an optimized version of the code where we are not creating the jumps arbitrarily. Like you can have a jump to some instruction. I mean, for example, the if else that comes into picture, or the if block. You can have either the condition or the negation of the condition, and depending upon that, you might have different jumps. So therefore, the number of basic blocks might differ. That is correct. We'll discuss that, and your answers could be different. That's okay. As long as it is correct, it's all right. So how many basic blocks people have got? 5, 6? I know it is too early in the day to ask this question, but still. Okay, some of you got 5. Okay. I'll wait for a few more seconds for others to try out. So I see that some of you are, I mean, not some of you, but some of the class students are regularly not attending the classes. It's probably not a good idea, but anyway. All right, so all of you seem to have gotten 5 so far, at least 5 students have gotten 5. Okay, so let's build that up. So write down the first basic blocks instructions. Maybe we'll distribute it to the 5 students. So Sarthak, okay, maybe, okay. So Venkat has written prod equal to 1. Yeah, it should, yeah, I equal to 1 also should be there, correct. So both of these should be part of the same basic block, assuming that we are using a maximal sequence of instructions, because I equal to 1 does not, I mean, although it is part of the for loop, it always gets executed. Right? It's just the syntax, it says that I equal to 1 is part of the for loop, but will always get executed along with prod equal to 1. Therefore, it can be part of the same basic block. Okay, what is the second basic block? Here we are not sure about the value of n, and therefore we should not convert it into a do while loop. We should convert it into, keep it similar to the while loop. So if I greater than n, then go to end. Sure. Yeah, so some of you might have written it in the negated form, some of you might have written it I less than equal to n form. Either way it should be okay. So either it will jump to next basic block, which is going to be outside the for loop, or it could be jump inside, right? So depending upon how you have shaped it up, either way it should be okay. Anyway, the conditional evaluation of II with respect to n is the basic block that we have to worry about. The jump is going to be associated with the edge, right? And there are anyway going to be 2 edges outgoing from this II and n's comparison, one to the inside, one to the outside. This statement also has a label, that is correct, because this is a for loop. We want to come back to this. Contrast it with II mod 2, which has also the conditional evaluation, but it need not, I mean, depending upon how you write it, but if it would have been if in the outermost scope, that is not within the for loop, then II mod 2 does not really require a label associated with it. Right, so if this if condition would have been outside, you don't really require label to it because you are not going to jump back. So what Sarthak is saying is that since this is for loop condition I less than equal to n and we need to jump back to it, we need a label associated. Good. So let me show that. So that becomes the second basic block. What is the third basic block? The if condition Okay. So after I less than equal to n, assuming that this is true, we are going to go inside, and that is I mod 2. So that conditional evaluation has to happen. And after that, the next statement, prod star equal to II or plus plus I, whichever of these, it's not guaranteed that it will happen with I mod 2. And I mod 2 anyway is a jump. And therefore, it's not guaranteed that the next statement is going to be associated with it. Therefore, we have to split the basic block here. Here also we can convert it to do while. That is not clear because n's value is not known to us. So it's not clear. I mean, n could be 0, and therefore it might not be clear that it is going to be evaluated at least once. In the previous case, it was less than 10, so it was easy for the compiler to figure out. Okay, so that becomes okay. So I have followed Sarthak's suggestion that if I less than equal to n is false, that is I greater than n, then I have to go to the outside the loop, which is going to be result equal to prod, and that is a separate basic block altogether. And this I mod 2 becomes the basic block. Okay, and the rest of it should be easy. So we have already done 4 basic blocks, and you guys said that there is only one more required. How come only one more is required then? There should be 2 more. Okay, let's see. I think there should be 2 more, not 5 basic blocks. There should be 6. So prod star equal to II is going to be one basic block, and after that, if you are saying that plus plus II should also be part of the same basic block, that is wrong, because prod star equal to II may not happen at all, but still, depending upon I mod 2, if it is false, then you will still execute plus plus I, and therefore these two should be in separate basic blocks. These two should not be combined. So there should be actually 6 basic blocks. Does anybody see any issue with this? Okay. Did anybody get 6 basic blocks? Negated the if condition as well. Okay, so let's see. So I mod 2, if that is negated, still there is a jump just after that instruction, and therefore I mod 2 cannot be combined with the next instruction, which is plus plus I, because we require single entry, single exit. If we have I mod negation of I mod 2 and go to plus plus I, that cannot be combined, I think, Sarthak. Yeah. Anybody else got 6 basic blocks? Okay. 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 So in case somebody is sees any issue with whatever we have done on the slide, please let me know, because from our discussion it looks like there should be 6 basic blocks. All right. So there will be entry, exit, and some edges corresponding to that, and then there will be a loop. So after plus plus I, you have to go back to I less than equal to n, and therefore there is this backage. So that is going to be our basic block construction. I mean, control flow graph construction. Any questions on this one? So some of the observations that you can make are that if some instruction has 2 outgoing edges, which is essentially a conditional evaluation, that needs to have the basic block should end there. If some basic block has two incoming edges also, that means there is jump to it, then also you should split, right? There is one possible place where you can combine, even if there is jump, is when you have unconditional jump. So let's say there is some statement S1, after that there is unconditional jump to S2. Then as an optimization, you can combine S1 and S2 in the same basic block. So that is okay. Preferably, you can still keep it separately and have an edge from S1 to S2. But otherwise, even if you combine them, the meaning is the same. But otherwise, whenever there is conditional jump, you need to split. Okay. So, oh, we have already timed out. Okay. So that kind of completes our discussion on the code generation. And yeah, we are going to look at the optimizations, and this construction of the basic block, etc., is going to help us. The control flow graph is going to help us perform some analysis and optimization later. In today's lab, I'm going to take up some kind of primer on x86 assembly architecture, and that will probably help you in the code generation part. So those of you who are interested can join. So yeah, so that's it. Any quick questions?